Welcome back, ladles and gentrymen. This is Twisted Teach, back with another tier list for Rogue Adventure. This time we're going to be going over all of the skills in Rogue Adventure. Again, like the last tier list, we're going to have tiers F, D, B, A, and S. F being absolutely unusable, don't ever take. D being only in absolute niche situations will you take it. B is going to be your standard tier where, yeah, they'll have some niche uses, and yes, you can take them in certain situations and they won't necessarily be bad. A is in most situations, you'll be able to take them, and then S, if you ever see them and are able to afford them, you always take them. Or even in just niche situations, in a certain deck, they just make the whole deck run that much more smoothly. So we're going to go ahead and start off. The first of them is going to be Ghost Shield. It's at the start of each combat, gain 10 shield. Honestly, it's not really worth taking. It's only at the start of combat, which means at the very beginning, you'll get 10 shield. It's really not worth running. But it can be taken in certain niche situations, like where you can get armored off really easily, or a defensive deck that needs that start of the combat shield. Next is going to be Knowledge of Strength. It's never necessarily a bad thing to take. Strength is always good. But Elemental Evil at the very end, the final boss, he does still get the attack boost from this. Same with Knowledge of Resistance. They're both not necessarily bad to take. Resistance over Strength most of the time. Because Resistance is just, it scales much better. Next is Spiked Armor. At the start of each combat, gain 3 thorns. It's not ever worth taking this. Not even in a Druid Thorns deck are you ever wanting to go this ability. Next is Toxic Wall. At the start of each combat, apply 4 poison to all enemies. I'm thinking it's actually just S tier for any poison comp you're wanting to play. Poison is just one of the strongest comps in the game, and it's definitely deserving with the 4 poison to all enemies. Burning Wall, on the other hand, gets a nice D tier for it's playable, but only in absolute niche situations. Don't ever run it. Next is Frost Nova. This is definitely above Poison Wall in all situations. You are always wanting to take Frost Nova, which dazes all enemies at the start of combat. It's just too good to pass up. Next is Chain Lightning. The start of your turn, deal 3 damage to all enemies. Actually, I'd say in niche situations. Worse than Burning Wall. Chain Lightning, I guess, could put in work for you if you have lots of turns where you're not actually able to deal any damage. Next is Bones Armor. If you end your turn without a shield, gain 15 shield. It's a solid thing. If you're not able to get any shield cards in certain decks, like Barbarian, sometimes Necromancer, Wizard, and a few of the other classes, it's a solid card to take. Never absolutely bad. Next is going to be Bounty Hunter. Every time you kill an enemy, gains 7 coin. Again, it's going into B tier. It's okay. You can take it in certain situations, and it'll be good, especially early on if you can afford it. And it'll just allow you to get that much more coin towards the end of the game. Next is Shuriken Attack. Every time you play 4 combat cards in a single turn, gain 1 strength. I would say don't ever run Shuriken Attack. In most decks, almost all of the decks actually, you're never going to have the mana to be able to just play all combat cards nonstop. It's just not worth playing. Same with Kunai Tech. This one gives you resistance for 4 combat cards, and of course it's going to be better than the strength version of it, but it's F tier as well. Don't play it. Next is Gold Ingot. It's S tier. It costs 7. But it gives you the 300 coins, so if you're short a class ability, you're short duplicating a card, it's always worth taking, because it gives you that big chunk of coin. Treasure Map is a B tier take. If you're able to bounce around maps with another skill that allows you to choose what rooms you go into, and you can just choose all of the merchant rooms and chest rooms and just tear through the game, it makes it that much easier. And it allows you not to have any more bronze chests, but it still gives you silver, gold, platinum, and diamonds, so it's okay. Anti-Monster Mine. It's the worst version. It's a worse version of Frost Nova, but it does say at each combat, the first enemy that attacks you receives 9 damage, 9 weak. So this isn't the stun one. This is the weak one. I'd actually say it's A tier. It's worse than the resistance and strength that you can get, but it is still 9 weak and 9 damage, which is not necessarily terrible. Next is Telescope. It's another. When you go into a merchant room, start the next combat with extra 2 mana. I'd say it's better than the treasure room one, but it's not deserving of A tier. Apple Pie is also another one. I'd say it's worse than the mana, but it gives you 15 HP every time you enter a merchant room. Torch, I'd say, is a low A tier, high B tier card. It allows you to get 1 extra card on the reward screen after killing a creature, elite, or a boss. And it can be useful. You can get some really good cards off of it. And if you get it early on, it costs 5, and it allows you to just get the option of even more cards. Next is Potion Maker. At the end of combat, heal 5. That is a high A tier card, or skill. Some decks really need at the end of combat just heal a flat 5. I'm going to put that in S tier, just because most decks can use this very effectively, and it is always worth picking it up for 6. Thunderblast is a niche situation, B ranking, because it says if you do not play any cards during your turn, deal 20 damage to all enemies. You're not always going to run into a situation here. I'd actually put that low B tier. But there are certain times where that is just super useful, where you're not able to attack because the boss won't or will kill you. You can't attack because the boss's passive is going to kill you, or whatever. Dark Wall is the weak version of Poison Wall. It's worse than Poison Wall just because 4 poison every turn I think is better than 4 weak every turn. But in weak decks, Dark Wall is just it's a solid S tier buy. I would say Demon Eye, it gives you 1 max mana, but you are permanently blind. You can never get rid of that blind no matter what you do. If you are very comfortable and you know the damage numbers in and out and what phases are going to do what with everything you fight, and you can manage around Demon Eye, it is well worth taking, but it is only if you can manage to know every single phase of every single creature in the game you're going to fight. Frog Leg and Scorpion Claw. Scorpion Claw says you can't become frail, and Frog Leg says you can't be weakened. Frail means your armor is reduced. Your frailty basically reduces the amount of armor you can get. Weakened reduces the amount of damage you can do. Both of these are A tier cards. Most decks are in desperate need of these because it's going to stop all your damage or all of your defense that you would have otherwise to be able to kill a boss. So taking these most of the time are very solid cards, but they're not absolutely needed. On the other hand, Rabbit Paw, I'd say more important than Poison Wall, but less important than the dazing of all of the opponent's turn 1. You can't become cursed, which means you can't play the left and right cards in your hand. You can only play the middle 2. And that will save your life more often than not, because becoming cursed can actually cuck everything you want to do, because the cards you want to play will be on the sides. Shield Wall, every 10th card you're going to get armor. I'm going to say it's below Demon Eye, but it can be very useful. For every 10th card you play, you gain 10 shield. It's okay. Multi-Shot's an A tier card. I would put it down below Knowledges, but I would put it above Torch and Anti-Monster Mine. The reason being is certain decks like Wizard, Ranger, Druid, and any deck that you manage to get a bunch of mana in, this could be super useful, being able to just poke them constantly with Multi-Shot. 1 damage to all enemy for every card you play. So it can start adding up really quickly. Next is Darkness Boots. At the start of your turn, you gain 4 shield for each enemy that's weakened. In weak decks, it's good. I wouldn't say in most decks it's I'd say it's even below Apple Pie, but above the Treasure Room. Weak decks can use it better than other decks because say you've got 15 shield on 3 or 15 weak on 3 enemies, that's 4 shield for every one of those. It's a lot of shield that just starts adding up really quickly. And so in darkness or in weak darkness decks, it's a pretty solid card, but you wouldn't take it otherwise. Snail Shell is the next one. It gives you 2 armored at the beginning of combat. I'd say it's actually low B tier. It can be used in certain situations. It's okay. It's not great. Next is Perfect Crystal. Every 5th turn, gain immune. Same with the Darkness Boots. It's a pretty niche pick. Better than some of these. I'd actually put Bones Armor here. Above the Treasure Room, but below Apple Pie. Actually, I'll put it high B tier. It deserves high B tier. But Perfect Crystal. Every 5th turn, gain immune. This isn't cards played. This is just turns. So you can line this up with certain boss phases. But you'd have to know the boss phases and what bosses you think you're going to get. This could end up just being a dead card for you, because it'll immune you during a turn they're not doing anything, and then you won't have it during the turn that they do something, so it's okay. Weakening Aura, taking unblocked damage from an enemy will apply 2 weak to the enemy. If you're playing a certain Necromancer build, it's good. It's a high D tier. It's not worth taking most of the time, because you don't want to ever take unblocked damage for any reason, unless you're purposely trying to trigger Weakening Aura. Next is Electrostatic Field. Every time you block an attack, add 1 electrostatic point at the end. At the start of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies for each electrostatic point. I'd say it's better than Bounty Hunter. It's not better than Treasure Room. Certain decks like Warrior, Paladin might be able to use this effectively. If you're running Demons, you might be able to use this effectively, but it's not usually worth taking. Living Mana is just an F tier card. You never want to have unspent mana. You always want to spend all your mana every turn, unless you're pairing it with... actually, because it can be paired with Thunder Blast. You might want to put this at the end of D tier, but it's not ever worth, because it says if you have unspent mana at the end of your turn, deal 8 damage to all enemies. You don't want that. Book of Magic is a high A tier. For the decks that can use it with lots of magic cards, Shaman, Wizard, and whatever other deck that you manage to get going with it. It's a card you have to take in those decks specifically. It doesn't deserve S tier because it can be passed up and the decks still run effectively. So next is Necronomicon. Gain 1 max mana, permanently have your max HP. I'd say only in absolute niche situations. It's worse than Demon Eye, because having your HP, maybe for early game, it might be good, but for late game, it just puts you that much closer to death. But it does give you the 1 max mana, so I guess it might be useful. Next is Ghost Spear. Every time you play a silenced or blocked card, deal 14 damage to a random enemy. In absolute niche situations, you'll take this. So it's like Thunder Blast. It's like Electrostatic Field. Slightly better because it does 14 damage for every card, and you can just spam your cards on turns that you're blocked or silenced. If you're running a combat heavy deck in a blocked turn, or you're running a magic heavy deck in a silenced turn, you still can do a decent amount of damage to at least one enemy randomly. So it's pretty good. Thunder Sword. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies for each combat card played this turn. Another D tier card. I would say it's better than Burning Wall in certain decks, but worse than these 3 skills here: Necronomicon, Weakening Aura, and Ghost Shield. Next is Dark Sword. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies for each magic card played this turn. Necromancer and Wizard are able to use this a lot more effectively. It's going to go lower than Darkness Boots, but higher than the immunity here, because Weaken is it's way stronger than just dealing damage. Tear the Goddess is an S tier. It's the single most important thing you can buy in a deck, because being able to no longer be blocked or silenced allows you to play all of your cards without ever fearing that you won't be able to play certain cards in certain times. It's 15. It's one of the most expensive skills in the game, if not the most expensive skill in the game, and it is well worth buying if you have it. Next is Kraken Tentacle. It is better than Potion Maker, but not nearly better than all of these. It gives you 20 HP at the start of a boss fight. So at the very end of each map, you'll fight a boss and get 20 HP back. In certain decks, this is absolutely life-saving because you're wanting to burn HP, and you're going to want to have HP to burn when you get to the boss fight, and it'll help you survive just that much more. So, pretty good. Next is Necklace of Life. If your HP is below 50% at the end of combat, heal 10. Certain decks can use this really well. Paladin, Necromancer, Warrior, Shaman, Barbarian. Actually, Barbarian's probably the one that wants to use this more than anything else. But it is a solid buy no matter what. You could pick it up, and if you ever drop below 50% HP, just feel safe that you're going to heal at least 10 HP. And then mixed with Potion Maker and Kraken Tentacle, you could just get all your HP right back right before a boss fight. So, not really much there. Invisibility Potion allows you to dodge the first attack each combat. Assassin, S tier. Being able to dodge an attack and immediately proc your passive that's leveled up on him, perfect. Absolutely wonderful. Other than that, absolutely useless. I'd actually put it in F tier for absolutely fucking dog shit. Just because who fucking cares if you dodge the first attack? Nobody's going, unless you've managed to do it just perfectly where you're dodging life-threatening damage that you couldn't block otherwise, which is 9 times out of 10 not gonna fucking happen. It's not ever worth grabbing. So, next is Weak Dagger. At the end of each turn, your first combat card played will also apply 1 weak to a random enemy. Worse than Dark Sword. I'd actually put it down here at the end of B tier. It's a good card or skill. It's okay because it applies the weak, but it is random, and it is a combat card, so not nearly good enough. So, next is going to go ahead and be Burning Dagger. This is worse than Burning Wall, because it's each turn, the first combat card you played applies 3 burn. Actually, no, actually it's not, because all enemies get 4 burn. It's actually worse. Okay. Thunder Dagger. Don't ever buy Thunder Dagger. It's actually... Yeah, actually, I'd say Thunder Dagger's better than Thunder Sword. It's one of the only daggers better than the sword version of itself, because each turn, your first combat card played will also deal 5 damage to a random enemy. This could potentially do up to 3 damage. Regularly, this deals 5 for each combat card, so it's just better. Rock Dagger. Each turn, your first combat card played will also give you 4 shield. I'd say it's better than Weak Dagger, but it's not better than grabbing Armored or any of the other skills here for your comp. Mana Dagger, it can end up cooking you because it gives you Overcharged, but it is the single best dagger you could possibly get. I'll even put it above the Treasure Room, because it does give you Overcharged. It's a little worse than some other cards, but it's okay. Next is Soul Drain. Whenever an enemy dies, heal 2. You're always trying to balance this. It's worth grabbing in certain niche situations where you know you're not gonna worry too much about weak creatures, so you can heal off of them for killing them, but it's not good enough. Explosive enemies. Whenever an enemy dies, deal 12 damage to all other enemies. You're not running into enough enemies that you'll find that useful. I'd actually never buy it. I'd actually put it down here, even worse than Thorns. If literally in F tier, if only F tier skills appear, I'd even pass up all of these for Invisibility Potion. If I had to buy something, I'd honestly just hold on to my gems. But if you're right before the final boss, you have some gems, and you can buy some of these, I guess go ahead and do it. Next is Mana Strike. Whenever an enemy dies, gain 1 mana. You're never going to find any use for it. I don't think these are good enough. Sure, you might be able to make creature fights regular and elite a little faster, but you're never too threatened by them, and sometimes they're just one creature, so no point in doing it. Next is Toxic Explosion. Whenever an enemy dies, transfer all of its poison to all other enemies. Toxic Explosion is by far better than Poison Wall will ever be, because in a lot of decks that are using poison, you're going to have so many poison stacks on certain enemies that when one dies, you want like 60 stacks to transfer over to the next dude and kill him. And you could just kill all of your enemies if you have a decent amount of poison stacks on all of them as they transfer. Because so it always goes, the first one on the left dies, the next one dies, and the next one dies. They always die from left to right. So it can be really good. Always worth buying in a poison deck. Even worth buying in a deck that only has a little bit of poison. Next is Bone Staff, that says whenever an enemy dies, heal 1 HP for every 5 cards in your deck. Again, it's too niche to really buy. Better than mana, better than dealing 12 damage to all other opponents. I guess technically it'd be D tier because you can take it in certain decks, but meh. While your HP is at or below 50%, you get an additional 3 strength. I would say for certain decks, it's really good. It's not S tier worthy, but it's definitely high A tier because a lot of the times you're going to be below that 50% threshold, and it'll be super useful for you. You have 5 additional strength while you're at max HP. Paladins don't ever pick this up, mind you. It's definitely a better version of certain cards. Some decks can utilize this really well. Like Warriors might be able to utilize this if they're running a really defensive deck and they have always that 5 additional strength. Necromancers might be able to use it. Definitely Assassins might be able to use it as well. And it just makes it that much easier to kill your opponents with the 5 additional strength. Next is Stone Skin, which is the 3 additional resistance. Immediately better. I'd actually put that here, and I'd put that above... below the walls, below all of these skills here, but being able to get that resistance is just the most important thing here. While at or below 50%, like Paladins can use it, Barbarians can use it, almost every class can use it because you can guarantee that you're going to drop down below 50%. Most runs, especially late game runs, especially high Inferno runs. This gets better as you go higher in Infernos. Next is Devil's Deal. Whenever you lose HP from a card, gain 1 strength. Demon decks can utilize this really well. I'd say it's better than Knowledge Strength and Knowledge Resistance, but it's not better than Blood Rage or Scorpion Claw or Frog Leg. Next is Growth Blessing. Raise your maximum HP at the end of each combat. It's niche. Certain decks can utilize it really well. Necromancer, Paladin, Barbarian, I think are the ones that can utilize that better than anyone else. This is going to be Golden Potion. Increases your max HP by 10. Better than the Growth. I'd say worse than the Growth. In certain decks, it's super useful. But only in certain decks. And only certain classes. But this one gives you technically better scaling. Because if you get 10 combats done, you equal a Golden Potion. And if you get that early enough, it's worth it. Late game, better than a Blessing of Growth, but meh. Next is Toxic Globe. At the start of your turn, apply 2 poison to all enemies. This is a slightly worse version than Toxic Wall, but almost as good. It's 2 instead of 4, but it's all enemies still, so pretty good. Dark Magic. If you're running any weak at all, you're going to want Dark Magic. I'd actually even put that above, because it says enemies with weak deal 50% less damage rather than 30%, it just makes weak that much better. Then Dark Grasp is enemies with weak receive 30% more damage from cards instead of 50% with Dark Magic, which is Dark Magic, right? So if you have Dark Magic and Dark Grasp, they're taking 50% more damage while dealing 50% less damage. And in a weak deck with Necromancer, this comp is just, you want to go for this most of the time with Necromancer. So next is Purple Potion. At the start of your turn, gain 1 strength, 1 resistance until the end of your end of turn for each active... so it says, at the start of your turn, gain 1 strength, 1 resistance for each active debuff on you. Honestly, you're taking enough debuffs. I would even put this better than Knowledge, Resistance, and Strength. Worse than Devil Dealings. Because you're going to be running into points where they're going to put a lot of Frail on you. They're going to put a lot of Weak on you, and you can just stack the debuffs really quickly if you can't cure them, so these extra Strength and Resistance helps you kill them quicker. Next is Piece of Coal. At the start of each combat, gain 2 resistance and apply 2 random debuffs to yourself. I'm putting this at the high D tier. Only one deck really wants to use this, and that's the self-debuff Necromancer deck. Other than that, don't ever run it. So the reason it reaches D tier and high D tier is just because it's better than anything else here. Because you can get the 2 resistance, and it can just give you, like, Frail or Weak. but it's not better than anything else above it for certain, or all decks mostly. Next is Batwing. At the end of your turn, deal 4 damage to all enemies for each active debuff on yourself. That goes along with Peaceable. Only Necromancer's self-debuff one wants this. Birdbeak. At the start of your turn, applying a random debuff on yourself. Actually, I'd even put it here, just because not other decks that are being debuffed by the enemy can also just do the 4 damage to all enemies. It's okay. Next is Birdbeak. At the start of your turn, apply a random debuff on yourself and gain 6 shield. Not as good as Piece of Coal, but it's only used in the niche deck of Necromancer. Next is Phantom Spear. Every time you play 3 magic cards in a single turn, deal 8 damage to all enemies. It is a worse magic book. I'd put it low A tier for decks that are able to utilize it really well, because 3 magic cards in a single turn is not hard. Next is Pink Magic. Low A tier. Gives you Fairy Doll. Purple Magic gives you the Bear Doll. I'd say Bear over Fairy. These give you 3 towards your counter of your racial. So Beastmen get additional 3, Fairies get an additional 3. It could be really good. Ice King Sword. Only in niche meme decks are you ever going to play Ice King Sword. I'd actually, for the most part, not even ever take it. I mean, sure, if you only have F tier cards popping up in your buy list, then go ahead and pick it up. I guess it's not absolutely terrible, but it's not great. Eventually, you can flood your deck with them, and they do give you 1 mana back, so you could just spam penguins and never run out of penguins, and then you just meme your opponents to death in 1 turn, if you can manage it, which would be crazy. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see a Inferno 10 penguin deck. That'd be pretty funny. I'll try it one of these days. I'll probably take like Paladin or something. Next is Toxic Aura. Every time you block an enemy attack, apply 2 poison to all enemies. This gives Warrior the opportunity to poison an enemy. I'd say here, I'd actually put it less than weak, because weak is better in this tier than poison will be. Just because you'll get more use out of weak for these skills than you will blocking an enemy and applying poison. Next is Shield of Shadows. Every time you exile a card, gain 3 shield. Certain niche decks can really find this. Even fairies can use this really well. I would say better than immunity, but not better than poisoning your enemy for blocking damage. So there you go. Next is Dark Sigil. All your magic cards will cost 2 HP instead of 1 mana. Do not ever buy Dark Sigil. You will kill yourself with this card. I've done it more times than I can count, and it's never helped me. I think it's helped me win 1 like Inferno 5 run for Wizard. It's not worth it. Dark Matter. Every time you exile a card, deal 3 damage to all enemies. It's super niche. Necromancer's going to use it. That's pretty much it. Next is Weak Vortex. At the end of your turn, each enemy receives damage equal to its weak value. I would say Dark Magic and Dark Grasp over Weak Vortex, but Weak Vortex is far better, even than Poison, in this situation here, because they take so much damage. Next is Sunblessed Mace. It's going into high A tier. It's going to go above the Book of Magic, because Paladin and other decks that are running Angels will get the use out of this far better than anyone else. Every time you heal yourself, deal 10% of your max HP to a random enemy. This is well worth taking every single game. For Paladin, at least. It's a must grab for Paladin. If you're running Angels, this Amulet of Healing heals 50% more effective during combat. It's a super niche pick, and it goes above all of the other healing items here. I'd see even better than Treasure Room, but it's not better than the Overcharged Dagger mana and the immunity every 5th turn. Next is Acid Arrow, which every time you receive a debuff, apply 3 poison to a random enemy for each active debuff on yourself. Poison deck. I'd actually put it into this tier. I'd put it an A tier card if you're running Poison comp and you're running into the enemies that like to weak and frail and curse and silence and block you, the 3 poison just adds up over time, and it's well worth playing. Explosive Shot. Every 10th card you play, deal 10 damage to all enemies. I'd say better than Thunder Blast, worse than Bounty Hunter. Actually, I'd put it higher than Electrostatic, but not better than Ghost Spear. Because it's every 10th card, so you're playing 3 cards on average a turn. This is going to take you 3 turns to proc. And it's just, you can do better than an Explosive Shot. Next is Freezing Shot. Every 10th card you play, daze an enemy. This is going to go with Anti-Monster Mine. Yeah, as I said with the Explosive Shot, every 10th card, this just takes 3 turns, but you can get some really clutch dazes with this. It's not nearly as good as dazing them at the start of combat, because a lot of creatures want to go straight into you at the start of combat, but this can be life-saving, so take it. Next is Cursed Arrow. Every time you receive a debuff, deal 5 damage to a random enemy for each active debuff on yourself. I would say it's not as good as Dark Matter, but it's useful in Necromancer self-debuff. I'd say Necromancer self-debuff is actually a really strong deck to run. Every time, so this is Burning Armor. Every time you block an enemy attack, apply 2 burn. I would say it's even worse than the Dagger. Next is Circular Shield. Gain 10 shield whenever you shuffle your draw pile. This could be really, really, really good, but it's definitely worse than picking up the Armored. It's only in niche situations will you ever find that useful. Next is Crystal Sphere. When viewing your draw pile, the cards are now shown in order. I have never actually used this. I'm sure that it's super good, but it's going B tier because I've never really seen it work, just because I've never taken it. Next is Ice Block. Prevent the first damage you would lose in combat. Just like the niche, like every 5th turn get immunity, it's only the first, so I'd actually put it low B tier. Actually worse than the Crystal Sphere here. Master of Toxins. At the end of your turn, if there's at least 1 enemy with poison and weak, gain 1 strength, 1 resistance, and this scales infinitely. Ranger is the #1 user of this, well, followed by Assassin, Necromancer, and Wizard. Master of Toxins is one of the strongest skills in the game. I'll even go say it's worse than Tear of Goddess, but it's better than anything else in S tier. Always grab this if you're running a poison weak comp. Always. Every time you block an enemy attack, gain double damage until the end of your next turn. Warriors use this. That's pretty much it. But for them, it's easily actually A tier. I'd even put it above strength and resistance knowledges, because that double damage is going to save your life. Meteor Storm. If you have nothing else to buy Meteor Storm, just because at the end of turn 8 they do 80 damage to all enemies, and that one-shots pretty much everything. Warriors can use this more effectively than anyone else, but everyone can use this, and it's a solid card buy no matter what you do. So buy it, worth buying, good card. Next is going to go ahead and be Fire Punch. Whenever you burn, or apply burn, deal 3 damage to a random enemy. Even worse than the armor. It's not worth getting. Enemies pickpocket. Enemies drop 50% more coin. It's Bounty Hunter, but slightly better. Next is Toxic Strike. Whenever you apply poison, apply an additional poison. Worse than Toxic Explosion, in my opinion. But better than Poison Wall and Poison Globe. So, pretty good card. Next is Burning Strike. Whenever you apply burn, apply an additional burn. Burn sucks, but it is better than the Dagger. Key of Portal. Start of each combat with start with an Oracle in your hand. I would say the Oracle's better than the mana, better than the immune every 5th turn, but not better than poison or weak here in the situation. I'd actually put this down here with the rest of healing, so I'll put this down here below Ghost Spear, but better than Explosive Shot. Actually, I'll put Treasure Room at the... You know what? Treasure Room's going down to D. You only take this in absolute niche situations. Next is going to be Staff of Curse. Enemies in elite rooms have 25% HP. I'd say not better than Penguin, the Ice King sword, but better than Invisibility Potion. elite rooms, you're never going to have problems with elite rooms for the most part. That 25% HP is extremely nominal. No need to take the Staff of Curses. Mana Battery. Mana is now conserved between turns. If you're me and you forget to play all of your mana in certain decks and you didn't realize, S tier. For anybody else, you should be playing all of your mana. It can be sometimes a lifesaver if you can't necessarily play cards because you've been blocked or silenced and you don't want to lose certain cards, or you don't want to have a card come into your hand and then go to the discard. So it can be pretty useful. I'd say here it's better than Mana Dagger, but only niche situations are you going to want to do that. This is the one that allows you to choose your playstyle, where you want to go when you want to go it. Only niche situations. I'd say bottom of B tier. I never take it. I wouldn't really care about the increased timer as long as you kill bosses and you get through Inferno difficulties. I guess that's all that really matters. It doesn't matter how long you do it, because if you're not fighting for the top score, which most people aren't, then you're never going to take Phantom Boots. So, and then that says you may ignore paths when choosing your next room. Next is Blessing of Sanctuary. When you would die, set your HP to 1 instead. Become immune until your next turn. Also gain 2 strength, 2 resistance until the end of combat. S tier. It's one of the single best self-revives. It's not better than Phoenix Feather, which is the next one. But it says when you would die, heal 50% of your max HP instead. So instead of dying, you get half of your HP back. So if you die from full HP, you stay at full HP. It just prevents you from dying that turn. But if you die from like less than half your HP, slightly less, like 1% less, you'll heal up to 99%. So it's pretty good. Next is going to be Opal Stone. Gives you +2 to all race counters: Fairy, Beastman, Angel, Demon, and Robot. Far better than even Tear of the Goddess. As I said, this is the best skill in the game, but for comps, if you're running Fairy Beastman with Lollipop, because Lollipop is the best guard in the game, Opal Stone's going to be the best thing in the game to support Lollipop. So there you go. At the start of your turn, if all enemies have less than half HP, you gain double damage until the end of turn. This is Finisher. Only in absolute niche situations are you going to take this. It allows you to finish out fights quicker, which could be pretty good, but not necessarily great. And then Mystery Box. Upon pickup, gain 1 to 3 random skills. I've not seen it so far. At least I don't think I've seen it. If you do see it, pick it up. Because either way, you get 1 free skill. Can be absolutely useless. Can actually be debilitating. But if you get 3 skills, 1 debilitating skill and 2 great skills or even good skills, it's worth buying. I mean, it costs 0, and it's just good. I think you can only get them from chests, but I'm not quite sure. I'd have to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have it there. We have a large S tier category of skills that are definitely worth buying every game. A good set of A tier and B tier skills, and most of the time you're never going to even touch D and F tier. Don't ever touch F tier, actually. Unless you're meming. You can touch Penguin Sword, but don't necessarily meme your runs until you're very comfortable in the game, and at which point you're just going to take Demon Eye wherever I put it, right there. If you're going to meme, take Demon Eye. Might as well. There's no reason not to. Take Demon Eye, play Penguins, murder your enemies. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the skills tier list. I just wanted to get that done with today. So, thank you for joining if you joined. Thank you for watching on YouTube if you watched on YouTube. Join us at twitch.tv/twistedteach, TWISTDTEACH. No space. Well, other than that, have a wonderful day.